Yeah. Trying to do some milchas melachem of milchamas. Did I do this introduction properly here? I don't think I did. There's a very basic baya, which is what is the point of giving halacha for the future? Remember this question? We discussed this for Mashiach. So, oh, hello. Okay. So we have Chavrusa, Maziman. It's like a whole different situation. The Shnaim Sha'iskim B'Torah, Shlosh Sha'iskim B'Torah. How does it go? I don't remember. It's a chilek. Salam da shachilek. So we're saying that we try to learn Hilchas Melachim and Melchames, which is really Hilchas Melachim, Melchames, or Mashiach. Or maybe really Hilchas Melachim and their wars, and one of the kings is Mashiach and he has to do certain wars. Or maybe it's really Hilchas, the political plan for the whole world. Anyways, there's a lot of different ways because he has his whole thing. But anyways, that's not the right one. There's more of this somewhere. Yeah. I have it anyways. Not reading anyways.
I've recently gone to the.
You did that?
Oh.
All the kings, the Book of Kings, or the Rambam's Book of Kings. There's Sefer Malachim and Hilchas Malachim. Those are very different books. And the clash between those two books is what we have to discuss. Because so we discussed how, or like one way of framing the question or the problem, is how Rambam declared his will and his plan to write halachas, both of things that are negay b'zman hazeh, that are relevant. B'zman hagolus he calls it. He doesn't call it b'zman hazeh. So I remember because he's speaking. Yeah, I think that's his language. And the main place where he says this is in the Akdamat Sefer HaMitzvahs. It says Bena, if you could find it, like. Right, very famously, there's like we could start something like this. Famously, there's a big chilik between the Rambam and everyone else, right? In the sense that everyone else, and this is also very clearly in the Talmud this way, everyone else understands that there's two parts of Torah, or more parts, but two ways of learning Torah. One is called, in the Gemara it's called Drosh v'kabel schar, that's Chazal's language. Drosh v'kabel schar means for the purpose of knowledge, right? For intellectual purposes. Of course, Kabul Schar, you could say like, well, because it's a mitzvah, so you get Schar and Lemhabe, but it's just their language for intellectual, for where the knowing is the goal, right? Remember how there's things which are an end in themselves and things that are a means towards a different end, right? So the Drosh v'Kabul Schar means the study of which the study is itself the end. The knowledge is the point. Drosh v'Kabul Schar, right? Like
are these things that exist in the world?
No, halacha. When we study,
saying like what topic,
like famously, I'll give you two things where it says in the Talmud. One is famously about Pensoyer Moire, that someone says Pensoyer Moire lahayev le'osed liyos. That's the language. It doesn't say lahayev le'nivra, by the way. Lahayev le'osed liyos was not and will not be, which means I will make sure it won't be, right? Because if you really want, you can do it. It's a very weird thing to predict the future. It just means to say this is not a law that you should do or that anyone should have ever done. Maybe someone did it and he was wrong. So therefore, why is it written? Like he has to reconcile the text. It says, well, it was written for Drosh v'Kabel Schar. Drosh means teach, or like, literally search, but read. Whether it's speaking of like give a drusha and the besmedrash, right?
And what do we know
and receive
about
reward.
So what do we know about now?
What do we know about?
What's Hilchas Pensoyer?
Okay, good question. But something. We know about Hilchas Pensoyer b'Mayre.
Is there ever going to be something you'll do?
No, you will never do. Maybe you'll learn. Well, you're already doing something. You're already but you're already doing something. That's how I read it. You're already doing something. You're learning.
But part of knowledge is always to act on the knowledge. So it doesn't mean you'll act on.
Well, knowing is also an action. Akimas date avimase. I don't know.
True, but it's something if it's something about the world, then you'll do something. Doesn't mean you'll do this specific action.
Well, you could say that it's there's like ways of saying this, but I don't like them. Say like it's a mushal for something, or it teaches you something about the cosmos or whatever. I don't know. You could say things like that. Or you could say things like, well, the problem is, I'll get to the problem with this, but there's a problem with this, but I'm not, the problem is that if the Chazal don't believe in different subjects, at least these kinds of Chazal don't believe in different subjects having more or less ability to be taught for their own ends. In other words, and this is interesting, and this is something very particular to the rabbis, to the what we call the Chazal. Very funny thing, but our say the Chachamim. Something very particular to them, and is that in general in the world we know of practical wisdom and theoretical wisdom. Everyone knows about that, right? There's and now the thing with theoretical wisdom usually is that these are different disciplines, these are different subject matters, different areas of knowledge, right? So you could say practical wisdom pertains to how to build a house. Well, that would be an art in Aristotle's distinctions, but practical wisdom would be how to be a good person and things like that, how to have a good life. And theoretical wisdom would be how the world works, right? In other words, what we call physics and metaphysics, try the same thing, how the world works, how the universe works. That has no purpose. It's not, technology is not the end of that. Chas v'sholem, that would be like a chilla chachma to say that the point of science is technology. The point of technology is science. Or the point of science is science. In other words, the knowledge of truth is the end, like the Rambam calls it the truth for the purpose of truth. And why is it the end? Well, it's the end in the sense of the end of the human being. It's the best activity that a human being can do, remember? Anyways, and the thing with this, the way it's generally said, that's not, we should think about this, but the way in general, and if you read like most of the Rambam's Hasidim, for example, when they present this distinction, most of the like so-called Jewish philosophers, medieval Jewish philosophers, they tend to think that this has to do with specific subject matters. Or we could see in Plato's or in Aristotle's language, the things that don't change, or knowledge that is true knowledge, and to be true knowledge, it has to fulfill conditions of, there's different ways of saying these conditions, but at least conditions of perpetuity, of being always the same, maybe of eternity, of literally not changing, being necessarily true. According to Aristotle, only necessary truths are really to be known, because anything else you can't really know, because tomorrow will be different, so you don't really know it, right? So therefore, it turns out to be, this is like one of the reasons, that the underpinning reasons why only, right, we teach this all the time, right? Believe in this. Only the knowledge of unchanging truth, which is God and His actions, right? Or God and the primary actions, or the real ways the world works, can be the human end, can be the knowledge for the sake of knowledge, or learning for the sake of learning, right? And if someone says, well, I'm learning about Hilchas Pesach for the sake of knowing Hilchas Pesach, that would be irrational, and that would be incoherent according to this understanding of this. That is true.
Yeah,
that's why I had
that framework when I asked my question.
Right. That's why most Jewish philosophers, most medieval Jewish philosophers, not any Kabbalah and not Chazal, but most of the so-called Maimonists think that it's a waste of time to study Hilchas Pesach l'shem knowing. If you have to know it, like if it's practical knowledge, practical wisdom, even very good, you should study it in order to be able to pass Hilchas Pesach. But if it's not Pesach, and it's never going to be Hilchas Pesach, or it's like the Chavez says, some strange question, right, an uncommon question, how to give a get, it's a waste of time, and it's not there's nothing in it, right? This is what the standard philosophical opinion is. This is not Chazal's opinion, and not, I don't know if it's Rambam's opinion. At least to the extent that he's authentic, that he's honest to what the sages taught, it's not his opinion. Because Chazal, in other words, they're sort of, like in many things, you could criticize them, you could say that they're just confused. But they definitely, and this seems to be their opinion, and if you take them seriously as making philosophical statements, and not just like, not seriously, like many Jewish philosophers don't take the rabbis seriously, but if you take them seriously, then they, on the one hand, do see and extremely see the value of intellect as intellect. They think of knowledge as an end and not as a means. Famously, these discussions of Talmud Shmevel Demas and so on, but they definitely see the life of study as the best life, actually. This, what it says in the book 10 of the Ethics, and other places, they definitely see that that's the life, at least for them, for their friends. Maybe not for everyone, maybe there's the Rishmol Shitta, with everyone shouldn't do it, but the Rishim Beichel Shitta, what the rabbis are doing, what their life is, it's a life of study, it's a life of knowledge, and that is the point. Not in order to be able to, they don't see themselves, very important, do not see themselves as lawgivers, do not see themselves as primarily judges for the community. They do that sometimes also, and they sometimes, this is like a Litvish shit that people will argue with me, but I'm pretty sure that it has sources in Chazal. They sometimes even think that studying in order to be a judge, in order to give halacha lemasa, is something less than study for the sake of study. Many people disagree with this, but that's the fact. And I like that, because that shows that they have the philosophical ideal of study for the sake of study. And they would go so far to say that there are some parshas in the Torah which are there in order to study. And the biggest proof for this is very important. We discussed this. Did I discuss this here about Kadshim? I think I have this problem where I think things and I think that I said it to everyone. I said it in my this year in Yiddish. The very clear state reality of this is how the Chazal study Kadshim very seriously, and Taharis also for the Tanoim. But even the Bavli, which, and to be very clear, absolutely did not think that he's preparing the Shulchan Aruch for when the time of the Beis Mikdash should be built. There's not. It's very clear. We could have specific proofs for this. Unlike the Chavetz Chaim, who thought that we should study Kadshim because we're going to build the Beis Hamikdash and we need to know how many times to spritz the blood, the people who wrote the Talmud Bavli, that thought never crossed their mind. They were not trying to figure out how to do the sacrifices correctly. How do I know? I know. Don't ask me how I know. So I'll tell you soon. I'll give you the proofs. But they definitely thought of that. Why? And mostly, and the way they actually expressed this in the famous Gemara Masechtas Yoma and in Masechtas Vachim, they generally expressed this by saying, why would we have to decide how to do it? When Mashiach will come, he's smarter than us and he'll tell us how to do it. Or they say, Eliyahu, Mashiach, we have this ideal. You could say that it's not a realistic ideal, but they have this ideal. They think, in other words, well, you could say it's not a realistic ideal, but you don't defend it from it, right? Chavetz Chaim says, well, we got to do karbanas, it's a mitzvah, okay, he might also believe in some kind of supernatural Mashiach, but tomorrow it's going to come, so it's not so supernatural. It's supernatural in the sense of not entirely being something you could plan out, like the Jewish state, the white paper, that Herzl put out. But it is something that
white paper was bad.
It's what?
I think white paper was bad.
What was bad?
White paper was bad.
No, I meant, I'm calling it a white paper in a different sense, I know. But it was a white paper in a different sense. Anyways, it was, I don't know which color paper. Anyways, pamphlet. No, the Jewish state, there was this program printed by. Anyways, but these things he did, very interestingly, people like the Chavetz Chaim, I don't know why, did think that it's imminent, right? So it's very real in one sense and very not real in a different sense. Interesting theory of the end times.
What do you mean very not real? In what sense was it very not real?
I have to make another distinction.
Oh,
You understand? You could have three opinions about the kids, the end times, right? You could have it being a very practical thing, like the Theodor Herzl theory, right. The religious Zionist theory, sort of, although they also have makeup shura, they're not entirely on this side. But that is just a physical, like the Rambam seemed to say, this is a material, worldly political action. Can be done, figure out the political conditions for it, do it. Military conditions, political conditions, geographical conditions, do them. And then it's a very simple thing. That seems to be the Rambam's opinion, more or less.
Someone who wrote a blue sefer has this opinion too.
I'm not sure if that's the blue sefer's opinion, but you can ask him. Anyways, I know him. Yeah, I'm not sure. And the other shita is that is an entirely unnatural thing, transcended, right? Instead of imminent or immanent, it's transcendent. It's beyond human comprehension. There's a lot of Amr Chazal and Medrashim that match into this opinion. It's something in heaven, something in the next world. Adam Haba sometimes gets confused with Mashiach. Very clearly, this is something not for us to think about. Not of this world. It's absolutely not of this world. Right? Not shit is Shmuel. It's a different world, and therefore you can't really think about it because we cannot think of a different world. Very clearly, we cannot plan for it. We cannot think for it. There's a Yotzim and Aklal, like we could pray. Not clear we could pray for it. Rashi says you should not pray for Mashiach. You could hope, which is a vague thing.
Discuss there not being Bechira.
Yeah, vaguely. We could vaguely hope for it. I know that the Chak Leibachal Shiva seems to be closer to the Chavetz Chaim Shita, but that doesn't mean that. They don't despair, but don't think about it. That's the second Shita. That's the radically transcendent Shita. Then there's like all kinds of in-between Shitas. And one of them is that it's very transcendent. It's going to happen by magic, but it's happening literally tomorrow. In other words, it's in the end times are tomorrow on our calendar. They're on our calendar, which is a very weird way of living. But anyways, that's how the Chofetz Chaim thought.
Didn't that arise
maybe the
from
Lubavitch Rebbe
a mistake in reading of
Nothing is a mistake. Everything is possible. Nothing about the future is a mistake, because I wasn't there, so I can't say any. It would be very haughty of me to say that anything.
It's like the quote, the source.
I don't know if it has to do with the Rambam. So it's his pshat. Why do we need the Rambam? What's the difference?
No, because the Chaglim Shalom Shavi is like
it
comes from him.
Yes, so it's not really because of that. It's not because of that reading. I don't think. No, that's a silly thing. Nobody made that mistake because of misreading the Siddur. No, but they made the mistake. I don't think it's a mistake because of a reading of messianic signs. And if you have, and there's a reading of the signs, the Chofetz Chaim liked the Balfour Declaration and things like that, he wouldn't dare say that that's the Geula, but he would say that it's a sign that it's coming tomorrow, and so on. And tomorrow means you could put it on your calendar. By the way, I'm very serious. It's strange. Yes, it's strange, but that's the reality. That's what people like Chofetz Chaim thought. And even also Balfour, long before that, the Chofetz it's going on for hundreds of years. What was I saying? That's a very reasonable opinion. I mean, it makes sense. Anyways, that's not what my discussion is today. My discussion is back to the halacha. So because of this being his understanding of the end times as something radical, but on your calendar, therefore on the one hand, he is making a Beis Hamikdash, which is going to be al pi Masechtas Zvachim, right? You don't need to read anything besides from Masechtas Zvachim to know how to build a Beis Hamikdash, and Masechtas Menachos, whatever. Say the Kodashim. That's all you need to know, right? You don't need to do any politics. You don't need to think like for a second about what we're going to do about that building that someone built in the same place. Whatever. That's not his problem.
Join the army.
Yeah, all these practical problems that anyone that thinks, in a practical way, thinks he has to at least dream of how to solve them. He doesn't have to solve them because God will solve them for him. But somehow he does, and this is the basic mistake of orthodoxy, but who cares? Anyway, but what he does have to do is read halacha. And halacha is extremely practical, it's imminent. It's in the here and now, you have to do it. And since there is no halacha, right? All the Rambam passed into halachas, but he for some reason didn't rely on that. So he said we have to write a Shulchan Aruch for the Derech HaShulchan does this. And other people are thinking of this idea, we're going to write the halachas Le'Yis HaMashiach. How do you got to make a Korban Pesach? Let's write a short, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and so on. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, look at the halachas, which is the Rif on Tzedek Kodashim and things like that, and sort of dreams of writing a Mishnah Berurah for Kodashim, right? People for Zeraim we've done it. Anyways, now what was I saying? That is one shitta. So in other words, there's halacha lemaaseh. Again, there's Ian, which is not what this is about. Briske, they don't learn Kodashim in order to prepare for the Beis Hamikdash. They just learn it l'shma. And they like it because of that, because the less relevant it is, the less account they have to give to this world. Oh, it's true. I say this myself, I didn't make it up.
I agree with you. That's
and about the Chofetz Chaim and others, like the more Zionist way of reading Tzedek Kodashim is the opposite. Since we need to know halacha, and we halfway believe in Mashiach coming, but we don't believe in it enough that he's going to tell us what to do for some reason. Again, because of this shura that we have, because it's tomorrow, and it's like a chiyuv, it's halacha. Like you're going to say, you're making for Aliyah Navi? That's not the halacha doesn't say you could be for Aliyah Navi. Well, that same Aliyah, like once you're thinking of someone whatever you can do with Al-Aqsa, you can do with Aliyah Navi. No, for some reason, the halacha doesn't rely on Aliyah Navi because that's Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says that you can't rely on Aliyah Navi. I mean, that's the basic way of halacha thinks. Halacha is this very realistic, this worldly discipline. So we have to prepare the halacha. Sure, that's one way of learning Tzedek Kodashim.
I always felt like it was just a romantic rallying cry.
No. Chofetz Chaim was not romantic at all. He was literally preparing, and the Mechana Mikdash is doing that. Yisrael Ariel, he's in this shitta, literally preparing, making rehearsals. How do you spray blood on the mizbeach, and so on. And part of the rehearsal is to clarify the halacha. There's a lot of unclarity. It hasn't been done for a long time. We don't actually know how to do it. That is one way of doing halachas hilchos ha'osid, right? Hilchos ha'mashiach. Very clearly, the Gemara doesn't hold of this, right? And the very famous thing is because twice or three times in Shas, Rav Yosef asks on Abai and on Rava and someone that said a halacha that he's deemed to be irrelevant, Hilchas l'Mashiach. That's a question mark in Talmud Bavli. And the question mark means, and that's how Rashi explains it, at least in one place, why are you telling Mashiach what the halacha is? Like, halacha for Mashiach. In other words, Hilchasa, when we do halacha, right, when the Gemara says, like, how do we do Bechsa Torah, and then, right, and there's like 3 different opinions. Yeah. And there's like 3 different ways to do Bechsa Torah, and then we have to, like, okay, so how should I do it tomorrow morning? Right, so then we have Hilchasa Mai. What's the halacha? There's like this discussion. Maybe most hilchasas were written later. It doesn't matter. But whenever it says, comes in Talmud Bavli and says hilchasa, what he's meaning to say is, tell me what to do tomorrow. It's never a theoretical question, right? Theoretical, that's what the rest of the Shas is about. Theoretically, what if I have a kasha? What about this Mishnah? What about that? What about that? That's all fine. What about this pasuk? But what should I do tomorrow? Hilchasa means, what should I do tomorrow? What should I tell my wife? Right? What should I write on the calendar? What should I put on my to-do list? And because of this, Rav Yosef, when someone tried to pass the halacha over there, I forgot what it was, says, what do you mean, Hilchas LaMashiach? Like, why would you tell Mashiach what to do? Like, what kind of a discussion is this? And actually answers, there's two different places where there's the same discussion. One of them, there's a different answer. But one of the places he answers, and Rava tells him, so what do you mean? So then why do we study Seder Kodshim? Isn't that also Hilchas LaMashiach? He says, no, that's the Reish V'Kabel Schach. I'm asking you why you said halacha. Or in a different place it says, why was he machriya and something that doesn't make a difference. That's the one way that's very clearly in one place, in Zvachim, I think, where it says, the Gemara itself clearly makes this, the Sugi makes this chiluk. Like if it's Dreish V'Kalbas I understand. We're here and say the Kodesh. The whole thing is for Hilchas LeMashiach in that sense. But it's not telling us the halacha. It's not for telling us what to do. What to do, you wait for Mashiach to tell you what to do. It's not important for us to know what to do. That's the distinction that we end Talmud Bavli. So in other words, on the one hand, they put a lot of energy, a lot of effort into studying things that are not relevant, not because they think they will ever be relevant, and not because they're trying to be relevant, or they're planning to be relevant, or something like that. Purely for theoretical purposes, and they believe in this. And for that, there's a famous last Mishnah, or one of the last Mishnahs in Menachos, which says, and so on. And that has to be read also as saying that learning the Torah of Oila is as good or better than doing Makriv Oila. Not because, like the Shalom Parents was saying, that's not the logic of that Mishnah. Explicitly not. There's the Gemara over there, we could discuss, there's different members in this Sugya that one might be like this, one might be like that, but there's like one logic which is like, since we can't do it, so at least we'll talk about it. It's not that. It's not a b'diavad, it's Chatchila. We are not, in other words, even if we would go to Beis HaMikdash, we'd be more interested in the halachas than in the actual doing. And the Rambam himself, the Rambam on that Mishnah, gives us his comment on Parashat Mishnayos and says, this is why the current yeshivas are wrong. The Rambam says this. This is why the Rif, who wrote his book only on 3 Sidurim, on Negai B'Zman Hazeh, is wrong. Because we see that it's a mitzvah, it's a thing to learn. And that's why the Rambam actually, and this is very clearly put in a huge amount of effort in clarifying Seder Kodeshim and Seder Taharis especially, and prided himself very much on his work that he did in that, especially in his Akdamas of Ferish HaMishnah, where he reorganized everything to make sense in his head. And for the reason, he gives us the reason. He says explicitly that the reason is because in other words, the reason is not because the Rambam thought that Mashiach will come and he didn't believe in Eliyahu Novi coming, so he had to tell them the halacha. At least that's not what he says. The reason is that it's a mitzvah. It's theoretical study. And if you want to know the Torah, you have to know this too. That's what the Rambam says.
Could you say that maybe that it's not that he held it was imminent in the same way Chofetz Chaim held, but he held it's going to be relevant more for Melachim than the Kodshim, but that if you act like it's imminent, then there's a much bigger chance of being imminent.
My question is why is Rambam so anti-Talmud then?
He's not anti-Talmud. Guess what? That's what this shir is all about. He's not anti-Talmud. He's anti-rhetoric. He's not anti-Talmud. He's not anti the subject matter of the Talmud. He's anti the method of the Talmud. Which are different things. Right? The Zohar is really anti the subject matter of the Talmud. The Rambam, not the Zohar. The Rambam. People like him. Because they think the Talmud is about living on oil, about changing things, about the world of change, about the world under the moon, and that's not an interesting world to think about. The Rambam doesn't say this, ever, that I know of. He definitely thinks that the things beyond the moon are very important, and maybe more important and more real in many ways, but he never, that I know, denigrates the world under the moon in the sense of knowledge. What he is against and this is very clear, then of course, this whole mahalach that I'm saying is basically Rabbi Twersky's mahalach in his book on the Rambam, the Talmud Rebbe of Boston. Yeah. But very clearly, Rambam is not against Talmud, and what you have to do when you say, what you have to do if you understand things like me. In other words, let's clarify what I said. What I'm saying is that like the Talmud, like the Chachamim, at least the Rambam very clearly believes in the intellectual value of understanding Hilchos Tzedek Kodashim. Not only because there's a Gabiach Kohen that's going to ask him, Shalna Kehanim Torah, is it kosher or not? He quotes that, but in the sense of, you're stupid, you don't know what's a Shlishi de Tumah, like what's going on. Oh, it's complicated? So this is one thing. So the Rambam has two problems with the Talmud. One is a pedagogical problem, which is the first problem that he's very much worried about, which is that this is not a book that you can study. And that's true. Nobody solved that problem yet. All ideologies in the world don't solve it. It's not a book you could read. It's unreadable. We don't read it. We don't even try. We read Shulchan Aruch, we read Rashi, we read a lot of things.
Get halachas, we don't try.
Not even to get halachas. Forget about halachas, you see? Before halachas. It's not a book that can read and understand anything.
Why not?
Why not? Because it's a bunch of jumbled up discussions, which never get anywhere. And in other words, and this is for the Rambam's understanding of what understanding is, and also every lamdan in the world is understanding, right? If you have ever read, the logic, forget about physics. If you ever have Western logic in your head, the concept of a definition, right, and the concept of what Socrates wanted to know about everything, once you have that in your head, the Talmud Bavli is useless. Not useless because it's talking about how many times on which side of the Mizbech to spritz the blood. It's useless because if you want to know that, it doesn't give you the answer to that. What it gives you is all kind of random and totally illogical, for Greek logic at least, discussions about things. And he never answers you, okay, so can you tell me how many conditions there are for tefillah? Did anyone reading the Masechtas Berachos ever find that out? No. The Rambam was the first one. He said, well, tefillah has 10 things. This is literally imitating people before him that did it and Muslims that did it. But anyways, he came and said, listen, there's 6. I remember tefillah, there's 6. There's 10 tanoim, tefillah, 4 of them are akif, 6 of them are not makif, something like that. I don't remember, I'm not remembering. Maybe I'm confusing, something like that. And now you have definition of what tefillah is. Well, there's tefillah medarai, so that's this, there's tefillah medarabbanan, that's that. That's the definition of tefillah. That is not something that Talmud Bavli does. At all. He just doesn't do it. He does a lot of things, but not that. Which means that for the purposes of knowing, not for the person, not that you can't get halacha. I don't even know if it's true. That's another issue. But I don't think the Rambam is worried for that issue, because for that issue you can have rif. The rif solves that problem. And the Rambam and the yeshivas that the Rambam went to, they studied rif. Everyone studied rif. That was not a bayah. The rif solves the problem of getting the halacha out of Talmud Bavli. Now the Rambam was very much a fan of the rif. He thought that he was right, besides for 20 times, but still didn't write a book in the style of the rif, and thought that the rif was, and he explicitly says in the end of his Akdama, totally inadequate for, well, this is like a nice way of saying it, that nowadays people don't understand the rif either. But he really means to say the rif doesn't understand either. Because the rif is useless if you want definitions. If you want any lamdas, in other words, another way of saying this, if you want the generalizations, if you want the rules that lead to all the specific psukim, the rif is useless for that. By the way, the Rambam is also pretty useless for that, but that's a problem that later people will tell us about the Rambam. Because the Rambam is still stuck with too much Talmud for this. But at least the Rambam is trying. At least that's his declared motive. You cannot, so for one, so let's get two things. I'm confusing two things a little bit. Two things. One is that it's not a book that can be read. You literally need to go to school for 10 years to try to be able, just to read it. Forget about getting halacha and forget about getting definitions. Those are two different problems. Just cannot be read. You literally need, and this is true to this day, after art scroll, you need to go to school for 20 years to start to be able to read a page on your own. And most people can't do it after 10 years either. 25 years?
It took me
5 minutes?
Whatever, a couple of years, and I was like saying, for 1 year, 2 years of my life, after an hour a day, I sat with someone else my age and woke up brains.
Most people don't figure it out. Most people don't figure it out. Okay, but most people, listen.
13.
No,
it's not, like,
I don't know about you.
13 to
I don't know about you.
23.
I don't know about you. Most people don't figure it out ever. Just to be clear, most people don't figure it out. Most people that I know cannot read Gemara. They can't. They can go to a shir. Did you ever go to a Balabatim Daf Yomi shir? Did you listen to Stefanski's shir? Does anyone know Gemara from that shir? Does he know any Gemara? I don't know if he knows. Does he teach any Gemara? The biggest shir in Lakewood, you know?
Yeah, I
Does he teach any Gemara? No, he doesn't. Just to be clear, he doesn't. Nobody that went to that shir for 10 years could come and tell you what there's 3 couches and 4 taritzim and 17 rayas, which is every page of Gemara. Nobody knows how to read it. I don't understand what it tells. Forget about figuring out the halacha from it and figuring out the lamdas from it.
No, I'm talking about
They know a lot of nice Torah, a lot of nice stories, a lot of good lamdas even, but they don't know how to read Gemara.
Yeah,
It's
I
weird
remember
language.
there's
agrees
a
with me,
daf in like Masechtas Yavamis or something.
It's just only 5
There's
pages.
there's like a taisvis that explains you
No.
can actually move around all the punctuation and you get a totally different result. Like stop the sentence in the right place, and there's competing ways to just move the grammar around and make sense of the whole thing because there isn't enough syntactic structure. If you
That's for sure. There's no syntactic structure at all. There literally isn't. We all believe Rashi and people like that tell us what it says, but who knows if it actually says any of that. Anyways,
I'm talking about with Rashi, but
no. Any case, the Rambam clearly says this. He doesn't. He says it clearly that it needs. He literally says this. It needs many years of study, and he even talks about being written in Aramaic, which nobody knows nowadays. By the way, still nobody knows it. You know what Inaminu means?
No, I hear him.
I don't even know the literal translation, let alone like I sort of know how it functions in the sugya, but that's not. It's really bad way of reading a book. I mean, it's really not useful. Anyways, the Rambam says recounts all these problems.
I say the most it's the most useful way to teach
In
something.
Lakewood, there's many people that know how to read Gemara, but most people in the world can't. And the Rambam definitely doesn't live in this world where like we can force everyone. By the way, whatever. I'm not getting into
It could be it's not worth even the 2
Believe
years
me,
of
no.
learning.
Forget about the problem of Vur. It's not possible. It's not possible to get most Jews to read Gemara. Just to be very clear, it's not possible. And how do I know? Because I know many people that do it and they don't know any Gemara. Not they don't understand the sugya, the tifka. They just don't know how to read it, and they definitely know how to get anything out of it. How do I know? Because I see how it works. Okay, and good people, not even bad people, even me. I mean, it's whatever. Sometimes I'm in the mood, but it's very hard. And he says this clearly. The Rambam says it's clear. It's written in the ancient languages. That language is no, like he said, there's no punctuation. You need so much background to get it anywhere. It's literally impossible. Nowadays we have Rashi and things like that, and somewhat helpful. It is. The Rambam was before Rashi. If you remember. Remember, there was no Rashi in the Rambam's time. I mean, he might have saw some pages of Rashi, but it wasn't Rashi.
It's an incredible.
Yeah, Rashi invented a whole way of interpreting text. I mean, it's a whole thing.
No, I think it's actually very on point also of what the reader needs.
I understand. I'm asking.
I can predict certain things that he's going to do or not do.
I hold of Rashi, especially on Gemara.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about him. He predicts.
No, Rashi Chumash is also very good, but we don't live in this world.
One example is whenever he says Shem Chacham, it's always when you're not sure if it's someone's
Yeah,
name.
it's definitely. And Art Scroll ruins you, because the Art Scroll doesn't believe that you could read any word by it. Okay, that's the point. Point is that this is one problem. Okay, it's very basic. It's not a book that can be taught in schools, and the Rambam very much wants all the Jews to know some Torah, all of them, as many as possible. He believes in this. He thinks that we're a nation, like Muhammad said, the people of the book. And like the Rav Sadia said, we're not a people if we don't have a book, the same book to read. And it's impossible to read that book, since we're Talmud people. We used to be Bible people at some point, who knows when, maybe never. But we're definitely the Talmud people, and we can't read Talmud, so that's a huge problem. So one of the first project is the Rambam, instead of writing Rashi on the Talmud, he didn't think of that idea. Maybe that was a good idea, but he didn't think of that idea. He thought of a different idea to rewrite the whole Talmud in a way that you can read. And the Rambam is a miracle, a masterwork, a life historical achievement of writing a book that can be read. I think it's one of the only books ever written in the Jewish tradition that can be read.
That's what Sefer Mitzvahs.
Sefer Mitzvahs cannot be read, and many people think that they should read it, and that's a big mistake.
But I'm saying Sefer Mitzvahs, one thing he does is just tells you weird things
Yeah,
are,
yeah.
like weird they are.
Yeah, but that's just his notes. That's just his.
That's
his
a major. Just that itself is
yeah,
a
but
major.
that's people
work.
before him did actually. Rav Nissim Gaon. The Rambam writes a book that uniquely amongst most Jewish books can be read. You might need nowadays. Okay, it's not entirely true because, of course, no plan is fulfilled entirely, completely, not for human beings. So there's still a lot of context that you need. If you read like that Rambam, they sort of give you most of the context that the Rambam forgot to give you. Rabbi Makbili's Rambam, or Rambam Lam, Machayin Mishnah Torah, whatever they're called. Yachoy Makbili's Rambam. They do that, and it's a good way to see what the Rambam actually missed to tell us. But some of them are modern problems, but many of it is things that the Rambam himself missed. But anyways, okay, but he tried, and I'm telling you, you tell me one other, but like Yitzchok is a readable book. Like between the Rambam and that, there's nothing that you can read. Or in other words, no books that are meant to be themselves the teachers. You need a teacher to teach you. No, Mishnah Berurah can't be read.
And then go up and down.
Yeah, you can't read it. It's not written to be read. I don't know what it's written for, but not to be read. Shulchan Aruch also, it's written for people that already read a lot of things. There's no book that can be read. I mean, Torah can be read, sort of, but again, it's written for Besmedish people. It doesn't start anywhere. Try. Sometimes he tries, but also when he does a good job, he's copying the Rambam.
Who?
The Tur, Rabbi Yaakov, whatever his name, the Rosh. The Rosh does this pretty good, again, but it's a Gemara. In any case, I'm not saying, but the level of the Rambam's readability is, that's one thing. And again, this is nothing to do, to be very clear. He's anti-Talmud in the sense that Talmud is not a readable book, not a teachable book. He would be very happy if everyone could, in some sense, he would be very happy if people could learn Talmud, but they can't. And he's right. Maybe they should without being able to, but he at least tries Talmud. Now, there's two, like I said, there's one, the other problem of Halacha, I don't actually know. It's very interesting. You read the Akdamas of the Rambam. Do you have the Akdama here? This is the Akdama of Mishnah Torah. The Rambam very talks about the problem that we have. He does seem to talk about Halacha. It's very hard to read the Talmud. It was Manazeh. Listen to what he says. The Rambam says, in the end of his Akdama, it says, nowadays people don't understand even the Goyim's Perishim on the Talmud. The Talmud itself. This is his language, by the way. He seems to be talking about knowing what to do. But like I'm saying, it's not true. You could read Rif. And therefore, he's going to say the Torah pen. And if you get the whole context over here, why I should go back to this book. But he says very clearly, and it's very clear, and just to be very clear, when he presents the problem that he's coming to solve, his problem that he's solving is that people don't understand Talmud. The problem is not that people don't know what to do, what the Jewish law is. He does present it that way because of his understanding of what the content of the Torah being Tarei Mitzvah Sefer Hashem. So that is what you have to understand. But he doesn't present it as a practical problem. I don't think that the Rambam saw himself facing a practical problem that people don't know how to keep Shabbos because they don't know the halachas. That is the Mishnah Berurah's presentation. If you read the Akdama of Mishnah Berurah, that's his presentation. Or some other later halacha works. The Rambam, and this is
different, no?
It's very again.
That even if you know, you're still fuzzy.
But he doesn't say this. So the Rambam doesn't say it. It's very interesting. I'm claiming that the Rambam doesn't say ever. You could read him as saying this, but he doesn't say that. If you compare the Mishnah Berurah's Akdama with the Rambam's Akdama, you see that he's saying something very different. The Mishnah Berurah says, well, like in Akdama Hilchos Shabbos, quotes the Yaris Devash, that if you don't read Hilchos Shabbos, you're Machal Shabbos, which is one of the biggest nonsense that a Jew ever said. Can't be what all Yidden in the world were Machal Shabbos. Nowadays, anyone knows Hilchos Shabbos. It's possible to know Hilchos Shabbos in the sense that they think, what is he talking about? In any case, but he quotes these kind of things, and other halacha books, like people don't know what to do. You read like some modern adaptations of halacha, you see them presenting it like this. Well, people don't know what to do, and they don't know Hebrew, and it's hard for them to read other books. So I'll try to make it simplify what to do. The Rambam definitely doesn't give this presentation. You might like be medayik 2 words and make him say that, but both Nagdama of Sefer HaMitzvahs. And the biggest proof of him not doing this is that he totally doesn't do that. The Rambam is not a useful halacha book, contrary to what Rabbi Beck really thinks. The Rambam is absolutely not useful as a halacha book. You know how I know? All the things are in the wrong place if you're looking for practical halacha. Because let's say I'm a Yid, comes Yom Kippur. So if I want to know how to do Yom Kippur, I have a book called Shulchan Aruch, pretty good for that. Okay, it's not readable, but that's a writing problem. Imagine the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch or someone that rewrote it in a clear way. It says everything you have to do in Yom Kippur. Well, you gotta, and usually it goes in chronological order. Extremely useful. So every Yom Kippur you do Kappuras or you don't, and then you go and say Slichas, and then has Hilchos Slichas, and then then you do a Sudas Mafsekes, exactly, and then you do Sudas Mafsekes, and there's Hilchos Sudas Mafsekes, and then you say Vidui. Before you have to say Vidui, Mincha, so there's Hilchos Vidui, and then you go to Shul, and there's Hilchos Kol Nidre, and then there's Hilchos Mariv, and so on, and you have to fast. So somewhere we write about Hilchos fasting, and there's Hilchos, and that's all. Now, if you read Rambam, there's no such presentation in the whole Rambam. If you want to know Yom Kippur from the Rambam, you have to read 5 or 6. I counted before Yom Kippur, 5 or 6 different books. Like if you Shvisas Yom Kippur is in the right place. Thank you very much. So you know how not to eat and not to do Melacha Yom Kippur. But everything else is in the wrong place. If you want to know Hilchos Vidui, you have to learn Hilchos Tshuva. Like in some random place, in some parak in Hilchos Tshuva, it says Hilchos Vidui of Yom Kippur. If you want to know the Seder of Yom Kippur, you have to look in the end of Sefer HaHava with the rest of the Seder. You want to know what Kriyas HaTorah do on Yom Kippur, you have to look also in Sefer HaHava and Hilchos Tefillah of Kriyas HaTorah. You want to know Hilchos, what else did I say?
Well, you're deciding that the correct category is the day.
No,
What
if
if
again,
was the
just to be
correct
very clear, I'm not talking about the correct, but now you're thinking the correct category. It's true. According to the Rambam, the correct category logically, lamdish, the lamdish of vidui, vidui is can't Yom Kippur. Well, in Yom Kippur there's a din miyuchad that you have to say vidui, but it's a din in Hilchos Tshuva, theoretically lamdish. According to the Rambam, is lamdish, but that's not practical. That's not helping any balabatim that need to know the halacha. And the biggest proof for this is that every single other book ever written, including the Mishnah, which is not a practical book, but which is why this problem is not only a practical question, but every other halacha book ever written is not written in the Rambam's order. Which is not, there's no bigger proof than this, that the Rambam is not trying to solve the problem of people not knowing how to do halacha. And the basic reason is because I don't think that's a real problem. Number one, and it was solved long before the Rambam. Anyone that wants to know halacha, go to the Drusha and Erev Yom Kippur, it gives you everything you need to know. There's not so much you need to know. You don't need to know the whole Rambam in order to be a Jew. Unlike the Aras Davash, you don't need to know Hilchos Shabbos to be Kaim Shabbos. I don't think that's true. And even contrary, it might be worse for you if you know Hilchos Shabbos because Mitzvah Yeshagim. Not so simple. Might be better for most Jews not to know most of the halachas. No, not the point. So that's not what it's for. I don't know how they got this. And the biggest proof is, and if that's not enough of a proof for you, then the bigger proof is that he includes half of his major work is things that are ein nodig with managolas. It's entirely not relevant. There's nothing to do with it. And he doesn't say, okay, now we're going to start. He doesn't even categorize it correctly. It doesn't even separate them. He does separate things in certain ways, and the whole discussion of Sefer Zmanim, taking out all the Kavanas Amiyadim, but that's for his theoretical reasons, but not because of not for practical considerations. I don't think I've saw people claiming this, but I don't think it's true. Not for practical considerations. So it's not a book that's solving the problem of not knowing the halacha. And therefore him doing Hilchas Mashiach is not because people don't know how to bring Mashiach.
When I said halacha, I don't mean he thinks that for a random guy to do halachas. It means halacha should be. I felt more that halacha should be decided, and the Gemara doesn't decide halacha.
No, I don't think he's worried. I don't think he's worried about deciding. You see, the Rambam thinks of this. This is a big problem because decisions are a very, very unstable thing. If you're actually thinking of decisions, and the Rambam knows, and this has to do with the question of Chasimas Talmud and Sanhedrin and all these formal things, but we have to realize that the Rambam explicitly presents in Hilchas Sanhedrin, Hilchas Mamrib, the ability of the Sanhedrin to change every single halacha in the Rambam. That's number one. Yeah. And number two, the Rambam explicitly, and if you read any tshuva of the Rambam and halacha, he never quotes the Rambam. He never even thinks of that. It never works with Mishnah Torah. He explicitly understands, and so this is actually clear in several places, that the job of a posek, the job of a rabbi that passes halachas, is to apply his svara to decide the current case. It's not to know all the halachas and apply them mechanically.
No, but further up the chain, things have to be decided.
No.
Have you ever looked at halacha nowadays? You ever saw any modern day halacha posek?
No.
They're so stuck with 18 different people.
That's not the Rambam's problem. That's not. But this is a modern problem. The Rambam was not worried about this.
The Gemara itself is this to some extent, no?
No. So what I'm claiming is there's a different problem, not the same problem. Maybe it's not even a problem. But what I'm claiming is something else. What I'm claiming is that the Rambam does not think of his organization. At least this is one motivation. There might be other motivations, but the main reason of his reorganization of the Talmud, and in some sense the Rambam is a parish on the Talmud, like he explicitly says in the Zakadama, and also explicitly does. If you read, then Rabbi Twersky has a list of 5 pages of sources where the Rambam, there's no point of this halacha besides to explain a shtickle Gemara. Many such halachas, where it literally says this is what the Gemara means. It doesn't say Gemara everywhere, but this is what it means. And I never heard of that. Well, you should have learned Talmud, then you would have heard of it. So it's not really a book that crosses out the Talmud. It's in many ways an explanation of the Talmud. But what he thinks is like this, that since the God gave Moshe on Har Sinai 613 mitzvahs with their definitions, and many of their sub-definitions, sub-halachas in each mitzvah, therefore, and this is the basis for every halacha, everyone agrees with this, therefore, we have to understand them in order to know the Torah at all. And we have to understand all of them. All of them, because of course, to know the whole Torah, you need to have the whole picture, not only for more data for your theory, but that's what God gave Moshe, and it's important. You want to tell me what the Torah is for, you want to tell me what it's about, you got to know all of it. And because the Talmud doesn't do this in the correct way, the way he understands the way he understands what understanding means. If you get to tell me, you cannot tell me even one mitzvah, what its basic definitions are and what its basic laws are, which is what the Torah is. So he has to reorganize the whole Talmud to clarify that, to expose that. So what he does with Hilchos Shabbos has 4 mitzvahs, and these 4 mitzvahs have sub mitzvahs and so on. And that's what Shabbos is, Hilchos Shabbos is. Now that you know that, now do Talmud. The Rambam explicitly sees his book as Mishnah, not as Talmud in Hilchos Talmud Torah, right? Now do Talmud. In other words, now that you understand the basic theory of what Shabbos is, the basic general law, the general idea, now start applying it. Now start using it. Not now you have all the laws decided already. You don't have to decide anything. Chas v'sholom, of course you have to decide things. That's why we have Sanhedrin. That's why we have rabbis in each city and so on. Well, they can't argue the Talmud. That's a technical problem. I don't think the Rambam is for closing that technical problem at all. At least I don't want it to be that way. But I think it is that this is just the way of grasping. Now, there's only the serious criticism that I know against this thing that the Rambam does is Rabbi Kreska's criticism, which is that the Rambam does a bad job of this. And because the Rambam does include many, many specific laws which he shouldn't have. It's too long, the Rambam, you see? Rabbi Kreska has this amazing criticism of the Rambam, which is the Rambam is too long. It's too detailed, in other words. Too detailed. He has too many random stuff because he's also still stuck with the Talmud. And if he would really be a Lamban, he would be able to reduce Masechtas Pesachim, and he does this example in his Drush al Chag Pesach. It's not clear if his plan is doable because he didn't manage to do it either, but at least his criticism is a very good criticism. He says that you didn't do it and I did it, yeah. But Chazdoi says that if you would really be a Lamban, he also has a problem with Rambam not exposing his sources, but not the sources, his reasoning. He said if the Rambam would have really known how to do it, the Rambam still has a too formalistic understanding of halacha, and he still has a too copying too many details out of the Talmud. If it would be a real Rambam, then he could reduce the whole Masechtas Pesachim into 5 lines, and then you would be able to know every halacha. Not, in other words, you would have the generative, what's called in philosophy, something the generative rules, not the procedural rules. If you would have the generative theories of Hilchos Pesach, why is there, in other words, the why, right? The real causes. Why is there B'dikas Chametz? Then you could ask in every Shayla and B'dikas Chametz. He tries to do that.
I'm saying that
this is the source of Lamdas, by the way. Rav Kreska is a Talmud of the Ran. These are the people that invented Maram Lamdas. That's how it's supposed to work.
One of the ideas is that it does have such concepts behind it, underlying them.
No, so if
like you could actually like there's all those halachas are being ran by one.
Which
concept.
all of them?
Whatever, like you could have one concept running a bunch of halachas, and it's not obvious that that's true.
Well, if it's not true, then the Rambam's whole project is wrong from the beginning.
Why?
Because again, he doesn't think if he doesn't think of halacha that way, if he thinks that it's all just accidental decisions by some random bezdin, then the Torah is very something that we can. Then my whole shtickle Torah that this is a theory that can be studied is not true. There's nothing to study. You cannot study something that doesn't have rules. You can repeat it, but you can't study it. Then there would be no Talmud Torah. This would not be a science at all. This is all agreeing with the Aristotelian definition of a science. Like if you disagree with this whole thing, you could. But if you agree with the definition of a science, and everyone that learns Torah, including Chazal, very important, including Chazal, that from the first moment that they start doing drushes, there's Kal Prat Klal, there's Binyan Av, there's all these things which are basically ways of generalizing and working with generalizations. No question about it. Basic logic. I mean, maybe slightly different than Aristotelian logic, but that's like details. There has to be something that can be learned, and if it can be learned, then claims Rav Chesdoi, the Rambam is telling us too much. Like if there's like a whole, and he sometimes explicitly does this, and there might be reasons. But in any case, going back, I think that this is still true. That's why it's a good criticism, because the Rambam would ideally want that, at least in his theoretical idea. Like in other words, you should know the 6 kinds of kabbanis that there are. There's only 3 kinds, whatever it was, I don't remember. And from that, being able to tell me what every specific question should be. In other words, Sefer Avodah, Sefer Kabbalah are still way too long. Because they sort of obligate himself to quote every Gemara. He had different reasons, constraints for this happening, but it's still way too long. How did I get to this? So therefore, now this is why the Rambam's completionism is not out of the need to tell us the halacha from Mashiach. In other words, the Rambam's answer for Mashiach would be Drosh v'Kal V'Schal, the same as the Gemara's answer. Only his conflict with the Talmud is only that he thinks that the Talmud is a bad way of doing Drosh v'Kal V'Schal, or at least bad way for us. That's the pedagogical problem, but it's also bad philosophically. And third, I didn't talk about the problem of Machlokas, right? He has a problem with rhetoric. He has a problem with dialectic. He has a problem with rhetoric and dialectic, right? What's called dialectic. He has a problem with Aristotle's meaning of dialectic. He has a problem with arguments that are worried about themselves, right? He thinks that when the Chacham argue, and he thinks that many modern rabbis and his contemporary rabbis focus on disproving the other guy's theory instead of working from first principles and telling us what the correct theory, and then there would be no machlokes. And so he thinks that the Talmudists are too much stuck in winning arguments, and he's very against winning arguments. Amazingly, for the rationalist that you think he is, he doesn't like winning arguments, and he's explicitly against it. Besides, for all the bad midas that get confused, it's not a way of knowing. Winning arguments doesn't mean that you're right. Right? He's against debates, and Talmud is structured around debate, and that's also how most rabbis live their life, and he doesn't like that. Not only the people say there's political reasons for this, he wants to be the one that tells everyone what to do, but there's definitely philosophical reasons for this, because debating is only the level of dialectic, and he wants the level of proof. Now, what kind of proof could there be? And I'm going back to the beginning of the question. Is there only true proof in metaphysics? Well, in some sense, maybe. But to the extent that he does believe in the Torah, and the Chacham definitely believe in the Torah, they believe that Torah is also true in some sense. At least there's a science to it, or at least in some general sense, like in the sense of Tarek Mitzvahs, or in the sense of Ikrim, there's some sense where it's reducible to a science. And knowing that, and very important, if you're missing part of that science, you don't know any of it. I don't have the correct way of saying this philosophically. I could say it like in a simple way. I think there's a better basis for this. But he thinks that if you don't understand the point of a Mizbeach, you don't understand the point of Shabbos either. Or you don't understand it correctly. Like the way I would say it usually is that you lose proportion, which is definitely something that happens, right? Like there's 600, like I always think that people are crazy. Like you have, there's a whole book of Hilchis opening bottles on Shabbos. And literally you have to be a Talmid Chacham to understand the halachas. And that's like only one seif of one of the 39 parts of Melechas Shabbos. And it seems like people that would have had it in themselves, that they have to know 613 mitzvahs, would not have written that book. Does that make sense?
It's like anti-specialization.
I'm not of that. But it's anti-basing too much of your theory on a certain detail. Basing too much of your understanding. I'm thinking of like the general understanding of what it is, or what it's for, or what it's about. And I think, by the way, when people are very worried about the Rambam's Tamei Mitzvahs often, right? Where they say, well, he's disregarding all the details. And I think that you are regarding the details too much. I mean, the Rambam says this. Right? In other words, why? And people are very, very lost. Like you're so again, this is not the correct way. There has to be a better way of saying this. But people get very lost. Like, what's gonna be? We're not gonna be. If we live in, let's say something like this. How could you be a yid in the up north? We don't know when the Shkia is, and that ruins most of what we think of halacha. Right? If you live like in wherever it is, where the sun doesn't set at night, you shouldn't live there. It's anyways too cold. But if you live high up north, then it's a big. In the summer, the sun doesn't really set, so we don't know what to do, and it's a big shaila. So it's better for you not to live there, right? That's what a regular person says. And the Rambam would look at you and say, like, so you're saying that you don't really entirely know how to apply, like, one contingency of a tenth of one of the 613 mitzvahs. But what about the other 612? Can you do those? Like, where do they live? Well, okay, there's a problem. The 613 are already a lot of situations and so on. But
the question is whether or not we're choosing to value the internal consistency or the internal drama of the issue versus the application to achieve a result, right?
No, I think that I'm not sure what you mean.
Meaning, you could be busy with Hilchos Shabbos because you're trying to figure out how to rest. Or you could be busy with Hilchos Shabbos because you're trying to figure out whether or not.
So I'm not saying that. I think that trying to have the whole thing in your head gives it a entirely different picture. But I'm saying clearly that this is not a philosophical thing. There must be a philosophical thing which says that not having the complete system means not understanding any of it. I don't know how that's justified, but I think there's such a principle implied in this thing. Like for any science. Like I said, one way of saying it because you can make bad generalizations and you're going to emphasize things too much or too little. I don't know, wrongly, by not having the picture in your head. I definitely think that that's true. In other words, I think
So you do agree
in
with
many
Josh-
ways, but I think there must be a philosophical, like a
Yeah,
more
I-
philosophical sense of this.
So you do agree
So shouldn't I
Joyce
put
from
that
Kal
up in
Sachar
Chazayas?
does mean that, like, at the end of the day, it will affect your Hachal Shabbos. It will
That's
affect
what I
Shabbos.
told you. That's something that I'm saying now, but it's not philosophical enough. I think that's something that I could see from my experience, from like people. I definitely think that most people that know all of the Torah in some sense have different view on certain pieces of the Torah also, on every one of them. No, like people would sometimes say like quantity has a quality of its own, you know. Bikiyas, it's in some sense creates Ian also. That's true. But I don't think it's only that. I think that there must be a fundamental philosophical idea here. Again, if you don't believe in the Torah at all, then you don't have this issue. And of course, another way of saying this, I wanted to say something else. What time is it? I have to finish. I was thinking of something like this, where, okay, there's another way of saying this, which is the political way, which is that if you see, and this is certain assumptions, but if you see the Torah, the mitzvahs, as trying to establish a state, in the broader sense, or in the more constrained sense, in the sense of a society, right? So, in other words, or even establishing a human being, right? That's another way of saying it, right? If you think, like most people think, that mitzvahs are just actions, that like don't need to have context. They don't need to. It's like a person does a lot of mitzvahs, so he gets a lot of schar, you know. But each one of them is just like a thing because God said it or something like that. Then it doesn't need to be relevant to know things that you can't do. Or maybe there's like a mitzvah along that. So okay, but the question is, what I have time, whatever. Why is it important? But if you think of it as at least trying to build a certain kind of human, right? Or if you think that's the ethics, or if you think of the politics, if you think of building a certain kind of state, certain kind of society, city, right? Certain kind of city, then it would be very wrong to disregard most of it. Now, of course, you could say, well, we're not in that perfect city because of gullus, because of being in exile, because of not having power, because of all kinds of excuses. So therefore, we can't, and we don't have a Mikdash, we can't. Well, I don't know. You don't even know what it's for. You don't even know like what kind of place that plays in the whole state, in the whole thing. And this seems to be important.
Also, you have your book has only four topics that it talks about.
Which book?
Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah,
So
instead of 14.
It's like, no, we haven't been doing this.
No, it's
We
not.
actually
In other
haven't.
words, people that go around saying the Torah is a guide for life, the Shulchan Aruch is absolutely not a guide for life because it doesn't discuss most of life.
Right. So we actually haven't been doing this.
Right. No, that's one thing of saying. I don't know if maybe you shouldn't do it. I'm thinking only of understanding right now. And one way of saying
even
this.
understand, even though like of like viewing the world in that like you're saying this very broad sense, like it just doesn't do it, right? Because it doesn't talk about kachim and tyrus. Like
Yeah, and that's
maybe,
important.
if Shulchan Aruch also can include kachim and tyrus, maybe it's better than the Rambam in that sense. That's a better guide, but maybe also keep that in front of us. It doesn't.
Yeah, maybe. I was thinking today of something like this, like Socrates in the Republic thought of very nice language where he said he was looking for a definition of justice, and he said that it seems to be that people are too small to see it in. And he gives this metaphor of like if you have a book with very small letters, it might be hard to understand the book. So we could blow up the book into very big letters, and it's easier. Then you'll understand the small letters too. That is Socrates' metaphor, and that's why when he in the beginning of this book, where he gets frustrated and like ends at like this impasse of defining justice in the human, or what is justice, by like playing with definitions, he says, okay, let's tell the story of a state, and the end of the story is supposed to be that a state is like a very big human in some kind of way, and since a state is bigger, it's just easier. That's what he says. It's easier to read, and then we might find where justice lives in the state. That was Socrates' thought, and therefore he goes on to construct his whole state with all the levels and all the steps and so on, and finally tries to define justice as what? How do we find justice after we have a whole state? Tzedkes, by the way, justice in Hebrew is tzidkes, right? how to be a tzaddik, just man. Basically, it turns out to be something like the all the parts doing their correct job, and the ruling people being the right rulers, the philosophers being the rulers. In other words, your, like he says explicitly, right, your reason ruling your passions and your body and so on. And that would be, so for some reason, that was very hard to find when we're thinking of humans. So we're thinking of directly. But when we think of it as a full picture, we look at this whole city, how we're founding it, and we start thinking how it starts, and what do we need, and how do we get into our problems, and what causes the problems, and what might be the solutions for them. It becomes very obvious what is this justice thing that people are into. So I was thinking that if you think like this, then that's probably the same thing would be true for this Torah, which the Rambam sees as the blueprint for the correct state. And if you could say, well, who cares about the state? We only care about the individual human. Might be true. Not clear that we should actually care about politics for politics' sake. Because the whole point of a state is to have one tzaddik in it, right? Like it says in Akadem of Persia Mishnayos. And this is really the reason why, this thought is the reason why all the Frum Jews don't care about politics. Because they think that politics is only that we should sit and learn, and we're already sitting and learning, so why would we? And the problem is that that's a bad way of...
They lowered like the goals, so then it's just like, hey,
no, it's true.
We don't even need a state for that. It's like, no, the goal should be something that a state is necessary for.
Oh, maybe that's one way of saying it. But the other way of saying it would be that, and again, I'm still in London. The other way of saying it would be that since you're looking at a very small picture, you're probably missing some details. And missing some details, like I said, isn't the problem of missing those details, it's the problem of not having the correct definition of anything. So therefore, if you can't blow up your vision into these very big letters, into like big size scale model of what the ideal world should be, in other words, how does your king look? What kind of a king do you have? What kind of wars does he do? What kind of state do you have? How do you deal with all the different classes of people in the state, right? That was Thackeray's plan. If you can't answer those questions, then you probably can't answer them for yourself either. Definitely not for your family or for your little community and so on. So that's why part of the project of viewing the complete Torah is to have the Torah's laws of kings and the Torah's laws of wars and the Torah's laws of state and of conquest.
You can have this in an easier way because you have, I guess, a climate that's not so resistant. Meaning, if you would take all the Lamdanim and put them in the city, I don't know if you'd necessarily have a fire department.
Yeah, that's a different problem. You're not allowed to live, like it says in the Rabbi Akiva told his children, never live. You know, Rabbi Akiva, the greatest, the most philosopher ever, the person that his head was always in the cloud, told his children, don't live in a city made of people like me. Right? Yeah, but that's, so again, that's the first thing you said, that it's not enough that you're taking for granted a bunch of conditions, but I'm saying something more philosophical. I'm saying that not having...
No, what I'm saying is because you can't imagine, if you live in your own world, it makes you imagine what kind of king you might need, and what kind of rest you might require for a society, right? You think of it in terms of what applies to a human being. If you 30% believe in all the current institutions that are in place,
well, then you already have that idea upside there. Then also, by the way, then also,
believe in anything,
then
right?
also no, then your sovereignty over yourself will also be democratic, which is the worst kind of government, right?
Right.
Like we should eat a little and drink a little and nothing is organized, right? Because everyone has a real voice. That's how most modern people live because of their politics believing that's also what their morals are. There isn't really a good way of separating these things. Therefore,
Shiva's dance.
I don't know. What do they do?
No, it's just
Who dance?
by Chassan.
No.
Like maybe you should be the guy who doesn't dance. Maybe, I don't know.
What's wrong with dancing by the chasana?
It was just weird to see, like you say, like it's like he's partaking too much in everything. It's like I don't know. Something is like off of that. It's like this guy's with Shiva, he's there, so he's dancing. It just.
Well, he doesn't know how to dance.
Obviously that too, but.
Maybe he should go to dancing lessons. I mean, he dances so much.
It's just a matter of like I'm by a chassan, so now I dance. It's just.
Yeah, how does this connect to? Explain me.
No, because he's just doing it because that's what everyone does. That's what
okay, what's the bayah?
Like you're saying, he does everything.
Oh, because he has to do everything because he's democratic.
Yeah, he just like whatever. Dance like can't imagine not doing it because that's what everyone does. It's like I don't know, maybe you should. I don't know. Maybe you should. I don't know.
So, anyways, my whole drusha was to say like some kind of Chassidish pshat that Hilchos Malachim is really about being a king over yourself. but in order to be king over yourself, you gotta know how a king works. And why is this? Because it's hard to read small letters. And same thing, Mashiach. Hilchos Mashiach is really about bringing your own Mashiach. But if you don't have the big Mashiach, like here, you people are saying that you can't actually do it. That's another thing. That's practical consideration. But I'm thinking of the theoretical consideration. In other words, I'm thinking of why, because I don't think that the Rambam Hilchos Mashiach is for telling Mashiach what to do. This was very important to me. Because unlike Lubavitch Rebbe, I think Mashiach has to read Rambam. Mashiach doesn't have to know any Rambam.
Yeah, isn't the Rambam
Well,
saying
maybe he
that?
has to know.
Isn't the whole point of the Rambam saying
No, only, I don't know. The point is, some people think he does. I'm not sure. But the king doesn't, in other words, it's not so to pass in the halacha, because that's not how you pass it. It is.
No,
In other
it's
words,
not
it is.
halacha.
Wait. Okay, it is. There is halacha in the sense, just no. But you have to listen. There's just as much halacha there as there is in Hilchos Shabbos. Because you're not supposed to keep Shabbos according to Hilchos Shabbos either. You're supposed to use it to understand what Shabbos is.
But Mashiach is more what
It's not different. No, there's no different. No, there's not. It's not only more. It's not. It's like everything. By the way, no. By the way, that's not true. You see, I gave this drusha once already. The Rambam's minimization of Mashiach is the exact same method that he does to everything. It's not special. Every single mitzvah, the Rambam says mostly what it's not. And every single ikka, the reason there's 13 ikkim is to say that the rest of the things are not ikkim, right? Everything works like this. God is only this and not most of the other things you thought he was, right? Torah is only this and not most of the other things you thought it was, right? The only Torah mitzvah is not the rest of the books. And so on. Everything has this only. And that's because of his, again, it doesn't mean that all the other things don't grow out of it, but because of his way of understanding it, every science has to, he's a fundamentalist. How do you call it? A foundationalist, right? You need to have every science has to have a foundation out of which everything grows out. So this is true for Mashiach. And of course, Mashiach can't not have that foundation, because then it would not be a Mashiach. Not like a minimal condition, it's the understanding. But now that you understand what it's for, or what it is, what's the definition, now the rest of your job starts. This is not the beginning, the end of things, it's the beginning of things. And that's true for every halacha in the Rambam. I don't think that's supposed to be a halacha book. And my proof from Hilchos Mashiach is that the rest of it is not a halacha book either. Halacha books are just like calendars telling you what to do, to-do lists. That's the sense. That's not the sense of Torah. I'm not sure if you use Talmud Torah at all if you read halacha that way. There's no science in that. There's no Torah. It's just practicality. You could learn it in the bathroom too. Halacha. I'm serious. It says that things that are relevant. In other words, if it's relevant, right, you're allowed to. Or like if it's, especially if it's like some people will say this, especially if it's formulated in like a practical way, like you should do this, but that's not halacha. Halacha is that you should do this. There's different. I forget how it's called formally. There's a different level. Like it's not the statement. It's like the command. Commands are not halacha, so not Torah. And the Rambam actually almost never gives imperatives. Never says you shall do. It's always the mitzvah is that you should do. That's a different kind of statement. That's a definition. It's like a theoretical thing. That's Torah. But that you should do. Go and light candles. Well, that 1 second. If I tell my wife, go light candles, am I saying halacha? That's Torah? No. I'm just telling her what to do. It happens to be that you should go light candles, then if Shabbos, midrabanan, midrais, whatever. Minig. That's not halacha. And the same to any halacha. As in the sense that anything that's just go do this is not Torah. Only if it's on Shabbos, Yidden, we have to light candles. That's different. Anyways.
And these principles are what? These principles are...
So they're intermediate principles. They're principles of politics, or principles of ethics, or principles of... basically that's everything, right? Or of knowledge themselves, which maybe in some sense they reflect knowledge. But definitely, like he says, Lisha V'olam, for knowledge of this world is also like a science.
So Kabbalah would be something about this world.
Of course. There's something, whatever they are. Maybe they're all... By the way, I think that he takes his theory in Moira seriously. They're all ways of correcting the worship of God from mistakes, whatever. But that's an important thing. You can't take it away. That's an important thing. And there might be like some even more serious principles behind them and different ones.
Also, those mistakes arose because there's something about a human, so therefore...
Yeah, but so again, the problem of historical contingency, we went through this in other classes. That's a problem. But, that's a problem. But
very bothered by that.
But it's still true that we live in that world that it was created by all these contingencies. So whatever.
I think the problem with people with contingencies is they don't what he thinks.
Okay.
The point of the whole mitzvah is.
No, the point is not that itself. The
They
point
have
is
this idea
the
that
goal
you
of it,
more
of
mitzvah,
course.
more schar. There's tons and tons of mitzvahs, right?
And it's not true. You don't. That's so sad.
Yeah. That's what they think, and he thinks that's how it is.
Okay. Yeah, that's the story.
I'd rather know a guy that's a koil and like, I think he like saying to be doing this like.